the chair you're sitting on, everything, your desk you use, the pens, everything around you is designed by someone and is about someone having an original idea, or it's everything. We drive, books, everything is designed, So that's what I'm saying about in everyday life. People think it's in this silo. So I think the more that we can actually shift our thinking to that, it's quite important.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Matthew Worwood.
And my name is Dr. Cyndi Burnett.
This is the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast.
On this podcast, we'll be talking about various creativity topics and how they relate to the field of education.
We'll be talking with scholars, educators, and resident experts about their work, challenges they face, and exploring new perspectives of creativity.
All with the goal to help fuel a more rich and informed discussion that provides teachers, administrators, and emerging scholars with the information they need to infuse creativity into teaching and learning.
So let's begin.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast. Today, we are going to talk with a very special guest. And if you, our listener, are interested in arts education, creativity, and cultural development, you're going to love this episode. So today, we welcome to the show Dr. Cheryle Yin Lo, who is an artist, arts educator, creative mentor, community cultural development specialist, and cultural consultant, and the director and founder of Creative Traveller Enterprises in Australia. She has worked in the creative industries for over 3 decades in Australia and overseas. Her work focuses on arts-based programs across diverse sectors and communities. Her doctorate in cultural research focused on creative arts as a catalyst for community participation and environmental stewardship. She teaches art in community and at university as a form of self-expression and communication in teaching for primary school teacher trainees. Welcome to the show, Cheryl.
Thank you. Thank you, Cyndi. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you across the world and connecting with you.
So, Cheryl, your work focuses on living an extraordinary creative life. What would you recommend to educators out there listening to help them live an extraordinary creative life?
People think that art is actually for special people and that it takes talent and that we're either born with it. But I believe that, as humans, we're all creative. And so I've really shifted a lot of my teaching and my attitude to education about arts education through the things that we should be doing every day, like being curious about immersing yourself in all the senses and also building your visual literacy by walking around, actually looking at things. Usually we're actually just going from from A to B and, forgetting about just everyday sensations and how we experience those. And we miss out on quite a lot. And just the way that actually works in terms of, creating excitement and joy. And, we hear a lot about that and those buzzwords, but it is actually about how we, excite ourselves still. And so I think creativity is an amazing kind of thing to introduce every day. And once you actually instill that and drawing upon your inner resources, and I think everybody keeps thinking, yes, it is an external thing about the skills that you learn, but just having that confidence to reconnect with your natural creativity is so exciting on every level and every day. And not just when you go for a retreat on a weekend and do a workshop and then you come back and you go back into the normal grind. It's like professional development for teachers. You get excited that you get the opportunity to do some professional development and you go there and you get excited, but then how do you then integrate it back into the classroom? So it's about really how we take that and in small and large ways. Yeah. So that's why I've been researching and talking to lots of people, working with people about how they can actually, do small things, even in a 9-to-5 job when you're in the school. And it's not just in that silo.
And just to kind of follow up a little bit more on this, and I don't want to make an assumption, but it feels like given your background and how you responded to that, there's a slight artistic approach to how you're viewing this creative life. And within that, you talk a lot about self and the senses and thinking about the relationship between yourself and your environment. Is that part of creativity, or is that more of the artistic approach to creativity that you see? I'm just curious, because that self aspect quite often is spoken about within the arts, and we don't actually talk enough about it on the show, I think.
But I think it also, when we learn about art making, it's so much focused still on the skill. And so, we have sort of raw materials and we're learning things and people judge whether it's good or bad about what we make. But I think it's more about reflecting inside about everything's unique about what's coming from an individual and the way they might interpret or use those materials. And that's what I'm interested in. And I think once we start to shift that, that's actually where it gets to an exciting space where everyone feels ownership over creativity or feels they can do it. And it's not about comparison. It's really like we're using these tools and materials to actually express what we are actually is coming from us. And a lot of my research was actually, a lot of people do see themselves separate from the environment. They don't understand that they're actually part of the environment and part of the ecosystem. So that to me was also important, and about our relationship. And, I live actually out of the city. I live an hour and a half out of Sydney in the Blue Mountains in the World Heritage Area. So my whole even physical and sense of awareness of my immediate surroundings is very different to people who are living in the city and urban areas. But, that disconnection, which I've found through with my students, was quite actually frightening about how disconnected people are. And I was saying that just because you live in an urban area, it doesn't mean you have to be disconnected physically or even yourself and your connection to being in nature, because the students, feel like they live in urban areas that they don't even have greenery or living things. I actually talked to them about even salad, like that's a living thing and came from the ground. But you don't know if you buy it from a supermarket, and out of a fridge. So even these kind of things were quite interesting for them about where they even felt they didn't really have connection to the living world. When we had a section in the science program about living things, it was interesting.
Speaking of your science program, can you tell us a bit more about how you're teaching art making to primary school teachers for science communication, which I thought was really interesting?
Yeah, and it was really interesting, the results, because I think even the students were surprised about what they were able to create. And in a university setting, and it was still kind of post-COVID where some classes are online or they have time away. So when it comes to physical art making, we actually didn't have a lot of physical classes together. And I'm really impressed about what they took in and what they followed up in their coursework on their own to actually create what they did, because they had to do a live presentation and they could use any media. They had certain science themes and they had to choose for their final projects. Then they had 5-minute presentations, but it was about collaboration. So they had to work in small groups. So it did require some preparation and times for them to organize themselves and work out a concept and develop that together. But they actually physically presented it to me for assessment. And they made amazing, like some of them wrote songs together, new songs, original songs. Some people made props and did theatrical presentations. Some people brought in ice blocks. It was about, climate change and about showing kids about just how things melt and just, it was very interesting about how they could actually make this more tangible, sort of abstract concepts to be more tangible. So it was even their creative thinking that was interesting. So not only about their art making, some people came out of a sleeping bag as a caterpillar and they had wings. And I thought that was kind of interesting about, just knowing that you need that shape and what do I have to kind of create that kind of concept. But that was very effective. Do you know what I mean?
I love these activities where you are challenged to express your knowledge in different ways. We just had a great episode with Shafina a couple of weeks back where we was kind of talking about the use of Lego as a tool to express your knowledge of something in a new or different way. And of course, you kind of really have to understand what it is you're trying to express in order for you to do it effectively. And I'm just wondering, is the content coming from you or is it coming from another teacher? Are you working in collaboration with someone in the sciences, or are you also teaching the sciences and just having them express it through more artistic endeavors?
But yeah, so this program is only a few years old at the university. And so it was written by 2 practitioners. One was a science and one was an artist, but we actually didn't find it actually melded as well as it could have. So it's in a bit in development. But as a tutor, we actually presented them content about the science concepts that was developed by scientists. But we also bring in the artist things like even Van Gogh and about colour, a whole range of different aspects of science and how it actually works with artists as well in the creative process. So there's a lot of examples of that kind of thing. And, the usual one is Leonardo da Vinci, but, there are other examples you use as well to show how they actually connect in terms of the way that science and art actually meet. And then it gave them the opportunity to look at some of those examples to then actually do their own art making. But they were just shocked about what they're capable of. Some of them, when we did the rounds about a lot of science people, in particular, like, the young people, they didn't do art because I was so science and maths focused. And that's like me. I just did art and history. I didn't really focus on those other knowledge bases. And so then we had extreme people then who were really into the art. But then they said, as a primary school teacher, you have to be a generalist. So, you know, they were more in the art, but then their science knowledge wasn't very strong. So it was very interesting. We had a mixture of that in the class. So I think people found it very interesting. There were two camps, extreme camps of uncomfortability. You either, you're either in the arts and you don't know the science very well, or you're in the science thing and this art making is kind of really uncomfortable, getting your hands dirty. Even I brought in some just natural plants for observation drawing and doing some ink and artwork from that. And then I said, pick them up. And like some of them just were going, just picking up and touching and feeling that I'm seeing the whole experience was actually quite foreign to some of them. It's like it was actually an unusual request to make to them like, let's pick up something and feel it and touch it. And yeah.
And Carol, just to pick up on the interdisciplinary piece, do you think that's part of the challenge and why sometimes it can be difficult to work across different subjects is the fact that we have different vocabularies and maybe different ways of being within these subjects? And if so, what are some of the ways that you've been able to kind of build those bridges?
Yeah, well, I think it's a lot about, again, the fear of learning something new. So, when we're talking about that space and how we move across them, we have to be open to say, okay, it's about a self-limiting belief, right? Like, I didn't think I could ever learn about that, or I'm not like that, or I don't like science. We say all these things, or I'm not creative. And so once we kind of can remove that kind of mindset and saying, okay, I'm here as in a growth mindset to actually be willing to say, I want to understand how that can actually move across. And there is different vocabulary. So it's just about learning the vocabulary of how we actually talk about that. And I was actually quite conscious of that in the classroom. I actually, asked them, what do they think the arts is? And people are very limited even about that. I use in my own coaching work and my own research and in the classroom, mind mapping. I find mind mapping really useful, as we know, in learning, but that was a really good concept for them to say, this is the arts. And then they realize, there's fashion, there's film, there's actually sculpture, design, and everything around us is actually designed by someone, so it's not just something that's contained in a classroom with a paintbrush. So I kind of try to really blow it out, which actually, is a bit destabilizing for people to realize that even the chair you're sitting on, everything, your desk you use, the pens, everything around you is designed by someone and is about someone having an original idea, or it's everything. We drive, books, everything is designed, so that's what I'm saying about in everyday life. People think it's in this silo. So I think the more that we can actually shift our thinking to that, it's quite important. And that, the school curriculum here in Australia, and I'm not sure in the States, but it's still very siloed. And this is why it's quite important that we start to think about how all these things actually interconnect. So my teaching's based a lot on that, and people are actually surprised then about they get into a much more comfortable space more quickly because they've either had this perception that things are over here, but they're in this space where they realize that they're actually quite connected once you point that out. Like, I use the example even when you get up in the morning, like you decide on whatever mood you are, that might be that color or that particular garment that you want to put together. And then you decide, I need to put something that goes with that. Now, I've talked to my husband as a male and he goes, no, I just throw that on. But I said, you still actually decide which clothing. So it could be the color or your favorite things. That's about making creative decisions and, visual aesthetics. And our place is Mexican, so every wall is a different color. And everyone thinks, oh my God, it's like most houses are like mute gray or whatever. But, even dishes I have handmade things from pot of friends of mine. It's everything. It's like when you go to a cupboard about which dish you pick up and it's like, it's a different color today. I want to use this. So, that's when during COVID, it's like I was thinking of different ways that you could actually, bring all that kind of thing into your life.
Okay, Cheryl, I want to talk a little bit more about interdisciplinary studies. And it's not something we've really talked about on the show, Matt. And I think that it's fascinating to think about bringing the arts and science together and creating stuff. You mentioned something in a brief passing that was something didn't work and we have to improve on it. Now, as researchers, which the three of us are, I think it's very easy to do research going out with a hypothesis that something is going to be a certain way. It doesn't. And those go into the folder of doom of underneath our desk in hopes that someday we might pull it out and reference it for some reason. But I think there's such a missed opportunity in those things that don't work as much as those things that do work. So in doing this work that you've been doing, I would love to know from you, what's something that didn't work that you need to rethink and re-improve?
I think it's about unpacking that whole thing about what we think the science is and what we think art is. Because, even when we expanded the mind map on science, they realized it was so much more. That even science was actually about light and photography, about even them watching a film. All that kind of thing is like that awareness of things that their young people are doing, like in everyday life. They don't realize that that's science and art actually happening when they're watching a film, even gaming, designing, and visuals, things like that. What I've experienced, even growing up here in Australia, I was born here, but the whole notion of Western art and even colour theory, we're bound by certain things that we don't even know are actually existing. I challenged that even when I was actually at art school about non-Western art theory. I've lived around the world in different countries, and even when I went to art school, I was told that red and green don't go. And I said, well, even when I was in my 20s and younger, I go to the Chinese temple and they're red and green. We're coming from a very interesting space when we talk about what we think, constructs of certain things are. And so I think the science people got shocked when I said it's not just about experimenting or even like testing and, and the cells. And for the arts people, that's what they thought science was. You just think about high school and you're looking through the microscopes or cutting up the rat or whatever. They didn't actually relate it to things. Yeah, like I'm saying, even some of you that live in a flat have a plant, or you can actually grow vegetables. You don't have to have a big plot of land and be out of the city. You can actually do it there and have boxes. And, that's a blowout for them to think, oh, I can do that kind of thing. You know what I mean? So that's why I feel this kind of, it's a self-limiting belief or this thinking or where we get these notions of we can't do that. And that's what I'm really challenging people in. What I'm interested at too, in the community arts centre that I teach at, we have people that are 99 that are printmakers. They're my next set of interviews about what it is about. And she's like a 5-year-old child. She's full of curiosity, just about creativity. And as you know, and this is what I'm understanding and trying to tell people is that when we thought that, creativity was on the right side of the brain, creativity is probably the most exciting activity that you can be involved in life, because it actually is such you're using all your complex neural pathways and it's right and left and a whole range of connections. And when it comes to resilience, I think it's really important that people understand that creativity is one of the key pillars to actually help people navigate uncertainty in a world that everyone wants certainty. And I went to a talk even with printmakers the other day, and printmakers said they love the part about when you make a print and you don't know what's going to be there. It's the excitement of reveal of the press. And again, like you're saying about planning things, you can plan things in art making, have the materials all there and planned on the table. But then what comes out is totally unpredictable. And it's about play, so the result is, you get an artwork on a piece of paper, but the results on there are all so different. It's like even, there's a lot of commercial things now we have where people want to explore their creativity, so they go and have the wine and sip. And even if they've got the same picture in front of them, right, all painting the same thing, they'll all obviously come out differently. Do you know what I mean? So I think people think it looks the same, but it's not, because everyone puts it all on differently in the paint and the strokes and, even the composition, or things are smaller or larger. But, those individual differences is quite important about that uniqueness of the way that translates. And I think there's not enough investigation. I've got a 21-year-old daughter, and even as an arts educator, observing her primary school, when a teacher said to her at Easter, you got to colour in your rabbits on a page and it's preset drawing. But, the teacher says to her, all rabbits are white. It's like,
I do find the color thing really fascinating though, because even when you're talking about that paint and sip, my initial thought is that if it's a tree, most people probably have using some type of brown for the tree trunk and green or perhaps another color if it's associated with the fall foliage. But, occasionally you do get this random, I'm going to use red, or I'm going to use pink, or and it does stand out. And even with my colleagues at the University of Connecticut, I'm definitely going to go away and think a little bit more about the color theory, because, there's the color wheel, for example, and there's certain colors like red is danger, red is romance, right? And I never thought about the fact that actually that might be a Western perspective of red, and outside of the Western world, there may be other perspectives. And so, again, art's not my field.
And also, too, just as an artist, I'm actually involved in a project about planetary health. And so, planetary health is about interdisciplinarity and the way the ecosystem works. And so when I think back, it probably even historically, even in some Western art and also Chinese art in particular, it was about the harmony of nature and people. You know what I mean? And so I'm actually investigating this theme and about how does that shift now in the way that we actually perceive ourselves in the physical world, but in our relationship to environment. Because there was a lot of things, even in Western painting, where that depicted those kind of scenes. But now we're kind of, in a very different space in the way. So I'm actually looking at that because I want to see how even visually you can demonstrate those shifts and changes, but also from a different perspective. Like, so even I said to my colleagues when we were presenting what we're going to do in art making, for one thing, I said I actually wanted to use a vertical format. In Western, again, we're used to using a landscape. A traditional Chinese art, it's on a scroll and it's this way. So it's really just even shifting your perspective about what we're used to. Do you know what I mean? Is quite important. And also too, just, when we're talking about art education, that's what I find interesting because I also teach painting as well as printmaking. And printmaking is a good thing to making marks and just trying to create a language. And it's very organic. But, painting again is that people, when you ask, a child or even someone to paint a tree, they'll paint what they think is a tree or a person. It's usually the stick figure. So, but if you say actually draw what you actually see, that's a very different concept. And they'll see that the leaves aren't all the same and that leaves come in different sizes and all of them aren't green. And they might have to be green and brown depending on the time of the year. But there's some great thinkers in drawing, which in terms of theorists, about all the way the Zen of Seeing, that's a drawing book. But, that tells you to just go outside and actually observe what a tree looks like. And it won't be a stick figure. And it's different to the different perspective that you're actually on. It's someone who's drawing it from the back or the side will have a very different perspective. It's like the whole thing about the metaphor about the elephant, when you ask people to touch a different part of the elephant and what does it feel like? Someone's holding onto the tail, someone's holding onto the trunk, someone's, it's that kind of concept. And I think that's where we don't investigate enough about visual literacy, about seeing and connecting, and a lot when you go, some people are encouraged to pull a picture off the internet and paint it. And, when I went into the community, I said, we just get rid of that. You need to start finding pictures or things, objects, or just photography on your iPhone that you connect with and you have a sense of place and connection. Do you know what I mean? Because even when you're doing the technical side of things, it's like you're just putting paint on a canvas. There's no emotional connection.
Well, Cheryl, I've spent a lot of my career working on a set of creative thinking skills to help bridge the gap between artists and scientists, because I think they do work in their own silos. And I think there's so much they can learn from each other. So for those of you interested who are listening, I'll link that skill sheet. There's 20 different creative thinking skills that I use to help bridge that language, because I think a lot of what Cheryl's talking about in terms of keeping open and curious and looking at things from multiple perspectives and mindfulness are all skills that we can relate to and use this language as we speak to one another to help really understand what creativity is and how we can use it as we work across disciplines.
Do you want to bring more creative and critical thinking into your school? Look no further than our podcast sponsor, Curiosity to Create.
Curiosity to Create is a nonprofit organization dedicated to engaging professional development for school districts and empowering educators through online courses and personal coaching.
And if you're craving a community of creative educators who love new ideas, don't miss out on their Creative Thinking Network. Get access to monthly webinars, creative lesson plans, and a supportive community, all focused on fostering creativity in the classroom.
To learn more, check out curiositytocreate.org or check out the links in the show notes for this episode. So Cheryl, can you tell us how you are using the 17 Sustainable Development Goals with teachers in Australia?
Really excited because about a year ago, I got invited to join the United Nations Association of Australia. So it's kind of a chapter that we have in our state. And so I'm actually working on what we call the school day program. It's an education program, and we're a team of volunteers with different skills. And we've designed a program which actually is called the Global Changemakers Program. It actually targets all schools in our state at primary and secondary level and independent private schools. And I've come on as an arts advisor to promote the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, but using creative-based activity. So we support the school, and it's actually probably be better this year. Last year we were trying to design it and deliver it. This year now we've got the package, and we started quite early, introducing just even UN concepts and the UN and what the work they're doing. And now we actually have a series of webinars where we bring speakers in at different times, but then we actually build up their capacity and skills to say by the end of the year, let's do a presentation or project that's based on that. And they can choose any of the goals, or it could be a combination of some of the goals. But last year we had 2 amazing projects from our state, and we had a big event, a youth event and a human rights event where we incorporated the awards, and they're called the Global Changemakers Awards. And one school actually got to shipping containers. And there's a place in New South Wales, in the state I live in Australia. Some of it kind of was probably a national story, had major floods, like the whole town went under. So, the resources, not only cultural infrastructure, but social infrastructure and housing is still recovering. So this school actually made a shipping container, and they actually made a knowledge centre inside, and they actually made resources for Lismore kids and community and schools. And they actually painted the container and they actually sent it up to Lismore, right, in our state. And then they also researched the poorest school in the world, and they found it was in this really small village in India. And they also did the same. So they painted the shipping container and actually developed resources and educational resources from the kids about the 17 goals and actually sent it over. Then we had another school who also won an award, who created a song. So they actually worked across some primary and high school, and they developed a song. We actually then used it as a bit of an anthem at the event as well. Some of the kids came to the awards, and they sent a recording of it. They took it it was really impressed because they have to give a little 5-minute video about how they made it and the steps and everything. They actually took it to their local member of parliament, local politician, and actually played it for them and kind of worked on it in a local level and promoted it. And then it's kind of to a higher level. But, just realizing that kids can actually use the simple tools of words and music and, integrating other things they're learning at school into this one project. And last year we had a big brainstorm. We thought, how can we engage teachers more? How can we, we know they're under-resourced and overworked, which I'm sure it's probably in the States. And, so we then also incorporated the design thinking framework, which is part of the curriculum, and actually put that together as well. So we have someone who's a specialist in that, who actually has a webinar and said, this is the way you can apply it in this context and to use it for your project. So we're really trying to build teachers' capacities as well, but also too, just as global citizens, I think as professionals. So, you can get qualifications and other information in professional development as a teacher with our program. So we're very excited, and all the time we've got new partners coming in, and the way we can even make that space exciting, but it's also how it translates to starting off as young people about how we start to be more active citizens and think about sustainability issues in our own life and also in society. Yeah. So it has, it's quite ambitious and it has many levels, but we think it's kind of an interesting way to, build capacity and I guess skills about life skills and the way we think about things. And it's in exactly the critical thinking and also creative thinking and how that can be applied just not in a specific container, but across, So that's where the interdisciplinarity, where, people, it's quite a big chunk to bite, but it actually can be quite exciting if we can facilitate and navigate people in that space.
Just out of curiosity, because I want to say it was a few seasons ago, I kind of went off on a couple of tangents about sustainability and climate change. But how well do you think we're doing in education in terms of cultivating a future generation that are working toward designing solutions to really complex problems? What are we doing well and what are we not doing well when it comes to those complex problems around sustainability and climate change?
Well, see, that's why I think I got a bit of a shock about tertiary level age students, like, people in their 19s, 20s, up to about 24. I think the primary and the secondary school probably kids are actually much more active and actually have a language to talk about it. When we did that science and arts teacher, I was shocked about a lot of them didn't even know a lot of things, many things we would I guess I assumed that these people would know. Their sense of the world generally, it wasn't very high, and their awareness. So, that's where I think it's a problem, because it's not a big community or global issue. They can't even see their lives. That's what I mean. Those issues, when I was talking to them about, did you think about how you go to the supermarket and you can actually go and get any fruit you like from any time of the year? And that's not a normal situation. That's a kind of a construct. But that's that generation, that's what they do. They don't even think about where that food comes from. And they think that we can't grow it in the city, or we can't even, there's a whole disconnect on a physical level and a conceptual level. So that's where I think it's problematic. And that's why, I think anybody that in any, life skills, we have to start young. We have to start from the very beginning as a core pillar of our education, because trying to do it later, it takes a lot of backtracking. We have some, obviously, internationally, a lot of young people who are 20s who are starting to be leaders in climate change, but they're pretty far and few between. You don't find many people that age who are articulate in that way. Like, I even use my daughter who's 20. I don't think she has a great sense of that, even though we've lived a more international life. She has some sense, but on an individual level, and people her age that she hangs around with, I can tell they don't talk about those things, or their caring or their understanding is not very high. So that's why I think the way we have to build things in, you can't wait for a sustainability subject to come up or choose it as an elective in tertiary level. It must be the foundation of a range of things. And that's why I think it's up to educators to be more interdisciplinary, because whatever you teach, there is a touch point in which you can bring that in. So, yeah, and because you find, it's like creativity in education, you're in a tribe with like-minded people, but you kind of go out of that stuff and you realize, people aren't thinking like that. It's the same with sustainability. That's what I mean. Yeah, you live in a World Heritage area, and even when I've done research and consultancies, it is a bit of a shock. It doesn't belong to us still, or it only belongs to people in certain who are growing their vegetables. International Women's Day kind of points out a few things too about this thing about inclusion and access, about the way that as people, are these people part of our tribe? Are we actually helping people to understand whatever passion we have, to understand how to get entry point into our discussion and make the circle bigger? And I think that's really important. So that's why, when I talk about everyday life, it's like now, even this dress I've got on is actually an idea from my neighbour's a dressmaker. I had this idea that I want a dress made of different cultures. And so this is an Australian Aboriginal design. So I'm wearing it. And so it's like, that creates a conversation, So, during COVID, when I was in the house, I was thinking, what are all the ways that you can actually have some encounter of creativity? Some people laughed at me the other day because I just have a window where there was a lot of shadows of trees, and it was like a light projection on my cupboard. I actually did a short video of that. And it was just, I woke up the other day and there's these things moving on my cupboard like it was a film. So I filmed it. But, your whole sense of awareness, when you don't have to go outside into a bigger open space, you can have these interesting encounters. I did a lot of shadow things from just in the house when I was during COVID. That's how my Creative Traveler Foodie Instagram started, because I love cooking, and I was plating up and I was using color, and that's become a life of its own. People, I was finding different ways that you could actually be creative in the house. Yeah. And that's where that concept of every day came from.
Well, Cheryl, we have to wrap up, but we end every episode with 3 tips that you would give to educators. So what tips would you provide?
I think about not being scared to step out of your discipline, especially as primary teachers, where I think you are journalists, not to be scared about the different ways that you can actually bring some of those different subject areas together. And same if you're actually a secondary teacher and even in a specialty area, you'll find that's what we, like when we did a matrix of the way that science and art fitted together, it was actually quite interesting about even having a matrix that you can actually just look up and go, okay, these are the areas I can focus on that actually connect. So it's just, again, about the growth mindset, not to be scared to step in new language, new knowledge bases, but also to actually grow ourselves and actually explore. So I never recommend anything I haven't tried myself. So it's a lot of fun when I take up challenges and see things and think, okay, how can we start to experiment in the way that we involve or incorporate things in our daily life? And that's why, so, my dress is just one example. And then my cups are made by friends who are potters. And so when people come, they go, oh my God, who made that cup? And they realize even what they're drinking out of is made by someone. People just light up. It seems quite unimportant, but to me, any way that you can do that, people realize that life can be different and your interaction with art and creativity can be different. Yeah. So I just think, I'm a big, actually, do you know Michael Gelb?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm a big follower of him, and I think his principles that he's distilled, the way that Leonardo da Vinci approached life, is something that I'm really keen and take up as a challenge, the way that you can actually incorporate those principles.
Well, Cheryl, thank you for this robust conversation. I know I have a lot to think about when it comes to interdisciplinary creativity and how we might look at the challenges that we face in different disciplines and look at ways that we might support one another. So thank you so much for coming on to the show. For those of you listening, if you like this episode and you have someone that you might want to collaborate with in an interdisciplinary way, you might want to share this episode with them and say, hey, why don't we try something like this with our classrooms and work together and co-teach something and see what might happen? Because I think the benefit of doing that is, as you said, Cheryl, you take the scientists and you show them some artistic ways to express their ideas, and you take the artists and you showcase their artistic preferences and artistic gifts and really hone in on that scientific inquiry and knowledge. So I think it's such a beautiful connection.
And I would just throw out there, Cyndi, I would also say that anyone who feels like an art teacher, I must admit, the concept of just looking at colors differently from other world perspectives, other than just that Western colors world's perspective, definitely, I think that's another reason to share this episode as well. So thanks so much, Cheryl, for coming on the show.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to meet you both, and thank you for the opportunity.
So my name is Dr. Cyndi Burnett.
And my name is Dr. Matthew Worwood.
This episode was produced by Matthew Worwood and Cyndi Burnett. Our podcast sponsor is Curiosity to Create, and our editor is Sam Atkinson.